Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on Bleakdale playing as the Empire against the forces of the Kingdom of Brettonia. And we are trying to beat Brettonia at what it is meant to be good at, mass cavalry. So, for those of you who don't know, the Brettonians have actually gotten some pretty significant buffs recently. Their lance formation no longer imbues a penalty of any sort, besides, of course, just the limits of the formation itself. And furthermore, I do believe that with the buffs to the Grail Knights, they have actually reached the point where they can trade and actually potentially out-trade the Demigryph Knight Halberds if they get the charge off, which previously they would lose in basically every situation. Now, in the little testing that I did, they actually beat Demigryph Knights with Halberds in a 1-to-1. So, definitely a little risky to go Empire with very cav heavy, of course, against Brettonia because their cav is just so good. But I thought that with this composition, I could definitely make it work. And so for my lord, I did bring Karl Franz. I brought him on a normal horse. Didn't bother with bartered warhorse because that would just slow him down and make him more expensive. Karl's actually pretty solid without Deathclaw, because Deathclaw only really provides a slightly more weapon strength, but otherwise he still has monstrous charge bonus at 90, decent armor at 100 on the horse, 78 speed, all that good stuff, a huge melee attack at 65, and he has two great upgrades. He's got the Reichland Runefang, which is a bonus to melee attack, and then he also has the Golem Raz, which is a self-cast that improves his bonus for sludge as well as his armor-piercing damage, which is pretty hefty to begin with, so it makes him really hit like a truck. And of course he also always does have the baseline stand your ground, and he does have immunity psychology, so just a very solid lord all around. Alongside him, I did bring an Empire Captain, once again on a horse, not bartered or anything, but he's just there to provide me with a little bit of extra leadership, a little bit of extra flexibility, and he is actually pretty cheap for what he provides. I do believe he only cost me about 600, 700-ish gold. So for a heavy cav style unit, he's definitely very cheap. I also did bring a Light Wizard, coming in with Protection of Fa, as well as the Net of a Mintok and a Power Stone. Of course, this guy is really there to kind of buff my knights, hopefully make him more on par with the Grail Knights, and net them down and prevent them from escaping, or prevent them from getting a good charge off on my troops. My front line is composed of 2 units of Reichsguard here, one on each end. The Reichsguard is just a decent cavalry unit overall. They have great armor, they've got a good charge bonus, they've got decent melee defense, all this stuff. And if I plow them into enemy infantry, which really here my opponent did bring men-at-arms, I was expecting battle pilgrims or perhaps foot squires. These guys would do really well against them, and they will hold their own against the majority of Brettonian mid-tier cavalry. Obviously, they will not do great against Grail Knights, but against just about everything else they'll do okay. Out on the flank, we do have the Sintler's Reichsguard over here, kind of camped out in the back. 2 units of Outriders just to kind of pepper down enemy heavy armor, pepper down enemy flyers like Lewin, perhaps get some damage in on units like Grail Knights, and all that sort of stuff. A single unit of Outriders with grenade launchers really kind of stiffening up my front here in the center. They do have 100 range, and they can do immense damage against squishy targets, and against some reasonably armored targets if they're very clumped, though obviously you're not expecting that with Brettonia. Finally, I do have the Royal Dovgrifites, as well as Demigryph Knights with Halberds, really providing me with a strong anti-large armor-piercing contingent. For my opponent, he did decide to go very kind of honestly a pretty conventional Brettonian build for what you see nowadays. A whole bunch of super veteran up men-at-arms with shields, which was this is the only really surprising part here. I was expecting battle pilgrims mixed in with foot squires potentially, but these guys of course have actually pretty solid melee stats, and of course with me not bringing any fear and terror, I'm not really going to be able to rout them off that easily. Behind them there are 3 units of peasant bowmen with fire arrows. These guys will just do a decent amount of work against lightly armored troops. They can easily zone away my outrouters, and they are dirt cheap. Unfortunately for my opponent, he doesn't have any anti-large here, so against my cavalry, it's going to be a big issue. He also does have a unit of Grail Guardians over here in the back, ready to stiffen up that front line with their monstrous melee defense and decent melee stats. And these guys did also get a slight buff. They can now enter lance formation, and they did get a slight buff, I do believe, to their armor-piercing damage, although it's still pretty pitiful at only 12. Up in the sky, they do have King Lewin, backed up by 2 units of Grail Knights, which I'm definitely a little worried about because they can trash. In my experience, they can actually trash the Demigryph Knights with Halberds, specifically when in lance formation, and they do have a Damsel of Life with Regrowth and Earthblood backing them up. And she also does have a Scroll of Protection, as well as another Power Stone. Lewin, of course, does also have his selection of buffs. He does have, of course, his self-healing. He does have, I do believe, the favored Son of Brettonia. But perhaps my opponent didn't bring that. He actually didn't bring that, but he does have the Sword of Crone, which is a great melee defense and armor debuff. Over here, my Outriders do position, immediately getting a nasty volley here on Lewin, knocking him down by a couple hundred HP, and I immediately kind of pull back, not really wanting to keep them in the fight. Over here, my cavalry is kind of setting itself up, getting ready to charge. Over here, the Zintler's Reichsguard does plow into the men-at-arms with shields, who of course do not have any charge defense, and they immediately lose almost 10 models on that single charge. And my opponent does push his Grail Guardians into counter, but Grail Guardians are not going to do good against Zintler's Reichsguard at all. Over here, the grenades you can see are already plowing into the unit of men-at-arms here, doing some crazy damage before the Reichsguard do plow in and take off about 10 models on the initial charge, and then they're just going to trade really effectively because of their huge armor. Over here, I do land a net on my opponent's Grail Knights, who are trapped now, and they do block up their the second charge from their supporting troops, and Dancel's life immediately getting caught here in the pits as Karl does charge in, pops Stand Your Ground to undo the Sword of Crones debuff, and allow the Demigryph Knights to hold their ground a little better. And of course, Reichland Runefang is just making them fight so much better, and over here you can see my opponent's lords just getting dragged into the muck. You can see my Outriders peppering away at the Grail Knights, bring them down a decent amount. And here in the pits, the Demigryph Knights are just tearing through Lewin, who just doesn't really have the best melee defense. I do pull off some Reichsguard away from these men-at-arms, who have been some routed, just to try to help shut down these Grail Knights a little better. Just trying to bounce my cavalry all around. You can see my grenade launchers here, down up to 29 kills already, but they were getting peppered a bit by those archers, so I do pull them back. While up here, you can see the Zintler's Reichsguard still running amok. My opponent can't really shut them down with the Grail Guardians, and my Reichsguard over here is just kind of chewing through these poor men-at-arms who really just don't have the melee stats to contest them. The Grail Guardians are also not particularly great against Reichsguard. They just don't have that AP as we discussed before. My opponent does get some men-at-arms into the fray here, but I immediately open up on them with the grenade launchers. You can see them like just sailing through the air and just exploding amidst these troops. And the cavalry is pretty resistant to it, but my opponent's troops are not. Over here you can see the Grail Knights fleeing from the field, trying to get out of dodge as quick as they can, but I do land another net of a Mintok on these Grail Knights. I actually did use a Foz protection in that fight as well, which I forgot to mention. But here you can see the Grail Knights did get caught, and they are getting peppered down very, very quickly by those Outriders. Lewin does desperately try to dive in to help support his troops. You can see he's already his healing cab. He's falling apart, and he does get caught here by the Free Fights, who are still somewhat healthy, the Reichsguard, and of course good old Karl, and they're just laying the smackdown on Lewin. Over here, the Grail Knights are getting peppered down by focused Outrider fire, and they're really just not going to be able to do very much. My opponent's backline at this point is being compromised by Reichsguard, who are just running amok and doing whatever they want. You can see these guys have gained a chevron. They're up to 200 kills already and climbing. Over here, grenade launchers peppering down the archers, and you can see they're up to 53 kills themselves, as well as about halfway to veteran C rank. Zintler's Reichsguard, not too many kills, but they've just been running amok and being a nuisance. And the rest of these troops, not the greatest kill counts, but definitely doing okay. So the result is a close victory, with my opponent's army completely shattering off the field. So looking at the kill counts, you can see really not many of these troops did too great. The infantry, of course, just routed at the end. But really, you can see just the power of the Imperial Cavalry. I was able to get some nasty nets on those Grail Knights because my opponent did come in from a single flank. Had my opponent invested more heavily into, say, his Grail Knights, had he, for example, 4 units of them, then this could have definitely been a much hairier situation. Because they would have no doubt been able to just collapse that small pocket of Demigryphs and slaughter them. But as it was, with a more balanced composition, of course, the problem is that Empire can bring nets and they can bring handguns and units like that, so you always want to be a little careful with overcommitting to cavalry, just because Empire does have some nasty counters to them. And with that sort of situation, the Reichsguard were just able to pile into the infantry, really massacre them, and get some early charges. You can see these units over 200 kills, which is pretty crazy. And the men-at-arms really weren't able to do anything to them. Even had my opponent had spears, they simply wouldn't have been able to do much to the 120 armor on the Reichsguard. The Demigryphs did kind of drag those Grail Knights into the muck, but they also did drag Lewin and the Damsel into the muck. It's important to keep in mind these guys gained 2 chevrons in the course of that fight, which is absolutely huge. And Karl was doing great. The Light Wizards providing great buffs, and the Empire Captain just kind of running amok, doing whatever. The Outriders, okay job at just whittling down my opponent's troops, and the grenade launchers actually really kind of broke the back of the infantry. You can see when you look at the kill counts, really most of the killing was being done by the cavalry, and even they didn't really get much done. The Grail Knights did okay, but they kind of had their charge interrupted and slowed down by the net. And then the Grail Guardians were trying to fight against Reichsguard, and Reichsguard is just so tanky. The Grail Guardians are really not that great against cavalry. Had I tried to engage them in an extended fight, it would have probably gone badly, just because the Reichsguard doesn't have the greatest melee attack, and Grail Guardians have monstrous melee defense. But in just I was just trying to run them away from the Grail Guardians, and they were trying to beat me down with their little swords. They were really hitting like wet noodles. The Peasant Bows got a few kills, but obviously that was against the Outriders. Really, this is, I think, a composition that can just work rather well against a faction like Brettonia, unless they really invested heavily in Grail Knights. So even then, you do have 2 units of heavy anti-large here. Definitely one of the things I was considering, or that might have been a decent choice in this sort of build, is trying to squeeze in, perhaps not bothering with Golmaraz, because despite being powerful, it only buffs Karl. Perhaps not really bothering with that, and instead bringing, dropping perhaps to Zintler's Reichsguard and bringing an extra unit of Demigryph Knights with halberds, especially against Brettonia, just to get that little extra oomph against units like Grail Knights if your opponent brings a few more of them, or Grail Guardians, units like that. nonetheless, great game to my opponent. It was a very quick matchup. I simply wanted to demonstrate this kind of fun little build, Empire build, with heavy cav. And I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments and criticisms, be sure to share them so I can respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.